Liberation. I am your man, Baba Dr. Brother Samori Kamara, and I'm here to help you to become a better warrior teacher so that you can provide the kind of African centered education your young warrior scholars deserve. In this first video, I'll be teaching the 5 school supplies we need as black homeschoolers. Right? The time is now for us to have more confidence, more knowledge, and a better connection when we're teaching our young ones. In short, it's time for us to become warrior teachers, whether we're teaching one or we're teaching thousands. Right? For me, I languished as a teacher within the public food system for 5 years, tried to do my part and be an oasis in a desert filled with standardized testing and universal miseducation. While there, I tried to, I challenged the status quo, but it was never enough. Eventually, I found the strength to leave. Well, actually, I was forced out for inspiring the students to boycott a standardized test. But after that happened, I started Kamali Academy 2 years later. I knew I could no longer simply complain about the problem and not attempt to offer a solution. So Kamali Academy has been going strong for the last 5 years, 4 years going into, and we're into our 5th year. We've had our our ups and downs, but through it all, I have learned a great deal about the best techniques and ideas in African centered education. My research plus my practice has fostered a perspective that I know will be useful for many folks who are just starting out and those who have been homeschooling for years. I bring some of that knowledge to the table in my book, Education for Liberation: The Top 20 Questions and Answers for Black Homeschoolers. Right? And I've heard often that people say everybody can't do this, right? And it's very similar to when I hear African women say everybody can't rock their natural hair. But I'll leave that one alone for right now. But the reality is you can and you must do this. And if you're already on that journey, you can and you must continue to do this necessary work. Some will say that African-centered education is unnecessary in this multicultural, flat world. However, I would say that it was and will always be necessary to center ourselves first and foremost, to gain knowledge of ourselves as a first step in any endeavor, to ensure the intergenerational transmission of African ideals and values. Without this, we will have what we have in our communities right now, which is chaos. But anyway, let's get to the content of this first training video. As we dive into this school year, school supplies abound at the stores, right? Notebooks, pencils, protractors, folders, and binders call our names as the essential tools for delivering and receiving a quality education. However, I know over the years that as a public food system teacher and a director of Kamali Academy, I realized that as warrior parents, we need a whole different set of supplies in our arsenal as we start the year, right? The first supply we need is patience, right? We have to realize that we'll have bad days. You will have bad days when you will have days when nothing seems to go right. Days when when our best plans do not survive the encounter with our young warriors. And that is fine. African wisdom teaches us that no matter how long the night, day is sure to come. So just as there are bad days, there will be many, many more great days. We need patience to understand that fact. Additionally, we need patience in understanding that our young warriors might not get it, might not get the concept the first, second, or even a third time. But we must maintain focus and realize that as black homeschoolers, we do not go by anybody else's schedule, right? Les Brown speaks of a Chinese bamboo story in one of his books. When you plant this particular bamboo seed, you have to water it constantly for 4 years before it ever breaks the surface of the ground. However, when it does break the surface of the ground, it grows 4 feet a day and eventually towers at over 90 feet tall. It takes 4 years of patient and diligent work, but the result is spectacular, right? And sometimes we will have to put some of the concepts on the back burner, right? When we're talking about teaching our young ones, we have to sometimes put the concept on the back burner and come back to it later. We must wait for those signs of readiness in our young warriors. Many times I've picked up a book recommended to me by someone only to realize that I wasn't ready for that information at that moment. And sometimes I would go back to some of those books later and derive a great deal of information and wisdom from them when I was ready. Our warriors, you know, our warriors will not be ready for every concept we teach. But wait and we'll see the signs when they are. Right? Lastly, we need to have patience with ourselves. You will not be perfect. You will make mistakes. But so what? Keep going, warrior teacher. And like fine wine, you know the rest, right? You know the rest of it. And the second supply we need is courage. We need courage, right? Our family will question our decision. Your friends will question whether or not you are qualified. Your children may question your decision to transplant them from the contaminated soil of the school system. That voice in your head will have a lot of negative things to say as well. It will take courage to hear those things and keep pushing. Some family members have fond memories of their school experience and cannot fathom a child being whole without them. Some friends will question your decision to homeschool simply because they don't have the courage to do it themselves, and your courage aggravates their cowardice. Be courageous in the face of those doubters. Monuments are never made to critics or for critics, but only to those who risk ridicule, who risk the criticism, and those who light candles instead of complaining about darkness. Let's move on. The third school supply we need is Kuumba, creativity. Right? We must not recreate the European educational paradigm in our home schools. Right? That will certainly defeat the purpose of homeschooling in the first place. We must not be tied to somebody else's common core, but to our own African core. And in order to do this, we must use our Kuumba in planning our lessons and creating the African environment needed to truly educate our children and delivering the content we cover. We must always remember that we are not on some standard time schedule, right? Since this is the case, we don't have to teach our children 7 days or 7 hours a day. We don't have to have separate classes for each subject. We don't have to administer quote-unquote standardized tests to assess learning. And this is where Kuumba shines. We must think outside the box, think outside the bun, think outside the barriers placed in our minds by our own miseducation, right? And apprenticeship. Apprenticeship represents another way to use your Kuumba. What does your young warrior like to do? What does she aspire to do? And once you have that information, find a person in the community who can who will be willing to teach your child on the job. Learning through apprenticeship remains one of the best ways to gain valuable and practical knowledge. One of our warrior scholars loves cooking here at Kamali Academy. So we are cooperating with a local, fine, black-owned fine dining restaurant to develop an apprenticeship program for that student. So, and if you think about it, if he spends a couple of years at that restaurant learning, would he have to go to culinary school to to open a restaurant? Probably not. There's really no limit. But a great way also to incorporate Kuumba is to use the teachable moments that happen multiple times a day, right? Before I headed to Washington, D.C. recently for a wedding, one of my students asked pretty sarcastically if I was going to go see all that white people stuff in D.C., right? I promptly asked him had he heard of Egypt on the Potomac. He nodded no, so we spent the next hour learning about the Egyptian or Kemetic influence that abounds on the National Mall. We covered the Washington Monument, which is nothing more than an Egyptian obelisk or Tekken, the Lincoln Monument, the black folk who built the White House, and the architect of D.C., Benjamin Banneker. It was a very fruitful conversation, right? But without Kuumba, I would have said, okay, we'll get to that later, right? Please use the world as your classroom as well, right? Next, the fourth school supply we need is curiosity. We must become the master learner in our own home. We must constantly learn and study. Honestly, I've learned more since I began homeschooling than I learned in all of my years in college. In fact, I find a weird joy in not learning, in not knowing something, right? But I have an uneasy feeling when I cannot find the answer, right? So my curiosity pushes me to learn more about who we are. It pushes me to learn better techniques to pull the genius out of our young warriors. And it pushes me to continue to grow intellectually, right? Curiosity is the foundation of wisdom. Question everything and cultivate it in yourself and your young warrior, right? And lastly, the fifth school supply we need is a sense of purpose. We must remember our why. We must remember the vision. We must remember who we want our children to be and the kind of environment they need to blossom. No matter what others say, be clear on where you're headed. You may not know every step, but be clear. Be clear on the fact that no one is a better teacher for your child than you. This is a part of your purpose, right? When things get hard and you are, thinking about putting your young warriors back into the public food system, remember that African wisdom teaches us that the first one to the mind is the winner. We must not give our children over to others whose only purpose is to groom them to be effective servants of others. Remember, the destiny of an African child is revolutionary. Our children's destiny, our destiny is to challenge the status quo and bring our lives into accord with Ma'at and our way. Having this kind of long-range vision, it keeps us from being frustrated by the short-range failures. Right? So there are the 5 school supplies we need as black homeschoolers. Right? So 1, patience. 2, courage. Tap your inner Harriet Tubman with this courage thing, right? 3, Kaumba. 4, curiosity. And 5, a sense of purpose, right? So going forward, I challenge you to cite below in the comment box at least one way you have used each of these 5 school supplies in your homeschool journey, right? The next video will cover how to ensure that your child gets into college when coming out of your homeschool. This is a question I get almost daily, and that video will provide all the answers you need. Again, don't forget to leave your comments below on how you use these very important school supplies. And I say this, hopefully this has served you well as you go forward on your journey. Revolutionary love to you all. I am Baba Dr. Brother Samori Kamara. See you next time. Remember, we must provide education for liberation.